Thank you very much. So I'm going to speak to you for the next 30 minutes, and hopefully at the end we'll have a couple of questions that you can ask me. So think ahead as I'm going through the conversation. If you've got a question you want to raise, please do speak to me at the end. So my job today is to try and talk to you about how you unleash the value of the data that you have within your organizations under a new customer contract. And I'll explain what that means as I run through the presentation. This is a picture of the Bank of England. I did try to find a picture of the Bank of Sweden, but I couldn't find one on Google. Maybe it's a bit more reserved in terms of pictures of gold in Sweden and stuff, I'm not sure. But this is the Bank of England vault. About a fifth of the world's gold is stored in that vault in Threadneedle Street under the Bank of England. There's a lot of value in all that gold sitting there. But one of the problems, your data might be like that gold. But is your data locked away in a vault like our gold is in the Bank of England? It very rarely sees the light of day. It just sits there, maintaining its value. So what's preventing us from taking that and turning it into more value, investing it in some way, exploiting it in some way, and turning it into even more value for us? Well, if it was easy in terms of taking all the data assets that you have in your vault, in your storage layers, and turning it into value for your organizations, if it was that easy, every single one in this room would be doing it. You're here because you understand that there has to be principles, techniques to leverage data in a governed way. So let's think about what's stopping us from achieving that nirvana. Well, the first of all is just purely the volume of data that we've got within our estates and where that data resides. Current estimates would say that there are 295 exabytes of data. That's a lot of zeros on the end. What does that mean? Well, just to put that in context, that is 300 times the grains of sand that we've got on this planet. Okay? So that's a huge, huge amount of data. Most of that data has been created within the last 10 years in digital storage. But that volume of data is nothing to compare to what we'll see in terms of the next 5 to 10 years. As we start to turn on more devices, depending on who you believe, either the likes of Cisco or the likes of Gartner, it'll then be anywhere between 20 and 60 billion devices, always pushing data through, every light bulb, every socket pushing data through. So this will go up dramatically. Can we deal with that scale? It's like drinking from a fire hose. If there's so much data coming at us, can we capture it? Can we collect it? Can we consume it quickly enough? Most organizations can't. The other thing that we're finding as well is sources of data are changing. In order for you to become relevant with your customers or improve your supply chain, you're going to have to integrate new sources of data. And it'll be sources of data that are more real-time than you've ever seen before. Here you can see on the slide every 60 seconds there's 695,000 Facebook updates and 1 million instant messages and so on and so on and so on. The organizations that learn how to exploit this data, consume it as it's coming in large volume, combine it with the information that they already have and make a decision at that point, which drives a product price promotion in real time, those are going to be the types of organizations that are going to set the bar in terms of the customer experience. So, have we got the agility to consume and make sense of data as it's coming at us in that volume? And it's changing all the time, different social media types, new IoT streams that come on. And at the same time, what we're doing is, we're pushing more and more data into a cloud. Historically, we used to keep everything in our firewall, where we felt secure that it was protected. And now I think the barriers have been broken down there. And we all know that, if you look at Gartner's statistics, most organizations by 2020, 98% will have cloud infrastructure in their organizations. The interesting thing is most organizations will still have what's called a hybrid infrastructure until 2025. What that means is they'll still have legacy systems on-prem as well as cloud. What that means is fragmentation of data. 10 years ago, all your data used to be within your firewall, within your business, and those of you who've worked with your organizations for the last 5, 10 years, It was difficult even getting visibility when it was within our firewall. Now our data is fragmented everywhere. And our line of business managers are buying and adopting more and more SaaS implementations like Salesforce, Workday, Concur, Exactly, and so on and so on and so on. Because it's driving real value to line of business managers, but it's increasingly fragmenting the data. So how can we give business the agility to adopt the types of services in cloud that they need, but maintain compliance in terms of governance of that data, and integrate it so we make sense of it and turn it into value? If you follow Gartner, that's what Gartner calls bimodal, the balance of giving agility whilst also having governance. And that's where that new customer contract is going to be important, that I'll explain later on. Because when you've got all this volume of data, when you've got all these new data types that you want to exploit, and you've got this fragmentation, probably, if you're a B2C organization, your view of a customer probably looks like this. Because your data is fragmented, probably your view of a customer is fragmented as well. Your view of a customer is probably different in different parts of your own organization. The marketing department sees a view of Greg, which is G-R-E-G with one G. E-commerce sees it as Hanson, my second name, with an E-N instead of an O-N. Typical errors which affect your ability to get a single view. Now, the organizations that are going to be effective in the future, there's going to be a high digital touch point with those types of companies in the B2C world. Because if you shop on the likes of Amazon or eBay, you're used to the type of service that those organizations give you. I've never walked into an Amazon store. I've never met an Amazon employee. But my entire perception of Amazon, which is high, by the way, I would rate them very highly as a vendor, a supplier of consumer goods to me. But it's all driven on my digital experience. And it's clear that Amazon, the likes of Amazon, have done a very good job in making sure that they're not affected by this fragmentation. They can pull a view together of Greg Hanson, which is clean and consistent across the organization as a whole. They can capture what I'm doing, offer me product price promotion to allow an effective use of my data. And in fact, if you think about some of those social media feeds as well, about how we can consume, react to trends that are going on in real time, what we actually want is not just a view of an individual. What we actually want is a view of a network. And with things like social media, LinkedIn, etc., you can identify not only that Greg has 2 kids and lives in Derbyshire in the UK, which is true, but in addition to that, you may know that I'm here with 4 colleagues today. You may know that one of my colleagues has just bought a new pair of jeans that I might be interested in, and so on and so on. So you can see how peer review, peer activity could affect the way that they position things with me in terms of the digital context. And the use of AI, as Thomas mentioned earlier on, is driving that digital experience as well, and they're pretty good. I think we've all had experiences where you go online and you see an advert that pops up and you're like, whoa, how did they know I was looking at ping pong balls yesterday? It's incredible, the amount of AI that goes behind that. But here's where the new customer contract comes in, because this is what we want to do. But as individuals, even myself, I'm concerned about our own privacy, the privacy of my data. And one of the things that organizations will need to absorb as they move forward in this new digital world, yes, we can exploit as much data coming on. You all know the regulations that are coming in. But our buying behavior will change. Our buying behavior as consumers will change in that the last 10 to 15 years, well, 15 years ago, my decisions were just purely made on the price of a product. I would go online, compare different suppliers, buy the cheapest, okay? 5 years ago, Amazon and eBay affected that by having peer reviews. So now I look for the cheapest product which has the highest rating. What I would foresee into the future now, the impact of things like GDPR into the B2C space, for example, consumers will rate and rank suppliers not only on price, peer reviews, but also on how much they trust you as a vendor. So if you're the likes of Target Retail in the US that leaked 80 million credit card records 18 months ago, or if you're BA that had and I'm one of the people who BA has had data stolen from, if you saw that in the news last week, that affects my perception of their business. It affects the trust that I have in them as an organization, and it affects my buying behavior, as Target Retail saw by the drop in stock price that they had, and the reflection in the number of their profitability moving forward. So we've got to balance that, have that bimodal approach, agility plus governance. So what should we do in our organizations? How can we take on this challenge? How can we exploit our data without alienating our consumers? I think the first thing to do is to look within our organizations. We have to have the right culture in the organizations that we work with. Even ourselves as an IT vendor, funnily enough, at Informatica, there is a We Data Week this week at Informatica internally. That is nothing to do with data per se. It's all about our ethics and our morals. And it's concerned around how we treat our customer data, our contact information, and what we do with it. So that's an internal program of work that we've got. I'm sure you all have the same, or many of you will have the same in your businesses. But it starts with a culture change. Making data the center of everything. Because in that digital world, data is the center of everything. How can you do that? Well, you can leverage things like the governance. I talked before about it's so important in the new world to establish a new customer contract that's built on trust, which requires you to have your governance in place, not just to be GDPR compliant, but because that's what your customers are expecting of you. And they will view you, rank you, and deal with you based upon their perception of your business. But governance can be a useful stepping stone to start to think about how you manage the data in your organizations. Now, again, a lesson from history I've learned is 5 years ago working in the financial sector in London, which I used to do a lot of, when I went into banks and investment banks, for example, if there was a new compliance legislation like Basel II for banking or GDPR, what would happen is they'd set up a project. We would have a GDPR project. We would have a Basel II project. We would have a Know Your Customer project. Each one of them would have a budget with several zeros on the end to do what they needed to do to be compliant. All of those projects were using the same data. It was customer data. It was customer transactions. It was all replicated across many, many projects. So there was no synergy, no use from that activity other than one valuable, and that's the avoidance of fines through being compliant, as they called it. A smarter way of doing that is to think about governance to benefit the organization as a whole. Don't think, how can I be compliant? How can I adopt that bimodal approach where I derive value from data in a governed way? That's a different way of treating your data. So you can use the governance story to drive the agenda around data becoming the center of how you look at your landscape. The other thing that I found useful in talking with organizations is to actually associate a value to data. Do you do this in your organizations? If you're a line of business manager, for example, like a head of sales, a head of marketing, a head of retail, for example, if you were to sit down for 10 minutes and think about the value of one accurate customer record to you, I bet you could probably think of what that might be. Because you know that if you get Greg Hanson right in terms of that single view of me, you can market to me more effectively. If you know what product I've bought, you've got a single view of product. You can cross-sell and upsell more effectively to me. If you know my network, you can use influencers in my network to drive what buying you think I will make. This is not a calculation that I generated, by the way. This is a calculation that appeared in Forbes magazine about 3 years ago, okay? But the article was an interesting one. It was all around trying to make people think about the value of data, okay? Why do we not value data in the same way that we value bricks and mortar? I would say to you that if you hold a large volume of customer records, for example, your customer contact list is more valuable than some of the properties that your companies own. Because without it, you're nowhere. So why don't we associate value to data? Why don't we engage that in conversations within the organization? And that will drive the right behavior, the right investment, and the right culture around how we approach data. So step one, in terms of that nirvana of getting to data value, is to create that data culture within your organizations. The second thing, I think, is to create a data management platform. Okay? So Gartner call this, if you follow Gartner, they call this a hybrid integration platform, okay? Which is the ability to integrate new cloud sources of data combined with old ones and so on and so on and so on. You can look at theirs. This is my view of the world, right? Let me walk you through what that means. Thomas said a very interesting thing in his introduction, which I was also going to say. The use of AI and common components. In that new world where you're facing all that tsunami of data, that new complexity of much more real-time sources of data that you'll need to integrate on a regular basis, you can't use what you've used in the past. My personal opinion is that if you're an organization that uses a plethora of tools, a plethora of skill sets, you're not in a position to compete into the future because it won't scale. So if you're thinking about using, this is again, my personal opinion, if you're thinking about adoption of things like open sources and so on, think about how that will scale for you in the future when you've got 10 different teams using 10 different applications and skill sets. In my opinion, it doesn't. What you're better off doing, and it's your choice to see how you want to categorize, but if you want to have a specialization in BI and analytics and you want to have a specialization in data quality and master data management, better to standardize on those disciplines and use at least one tool for each discipline or a platform as a whole. Now, the important thing at the bottom, I talked about consistency in terms of how you do connectivity and how you process data and so on. Now, Claire is our AI engine. But the reason why I put it there is because, as Thomas said, there is a race to adopt AI. And there's good reasons for that, because with all those volumes, we're going to need help to assimilate, consume, and make decisions around pure volume of data that we're going to experience into the future. But all that effort so far has been concentrated on the BI, the analytics layer, which is that drinking from the fire hose right at the end. But Thomas took the words out of my mouth when he said that in reality, if you still put bad data in, you'll still get bad decisions out. You'll just get bad decisions quicker. Really what we need to be doing is we need to be applying as much investment in AI, in the aggregation, consumption, and production of data before it's consumed by analytics, as we do invest now in purely the BI layer. So that's why I think it's important in the back end to have artificial intelligence there. What that will enable you to do is to automatically integrate data based upon previous patterns that it's seen. Okay? What it will allow you to do is to automatically manage failures of data. What it will allow you to do is to automatically correct invalid customer data. What it will allow you to do is to automatically match and merge to get that single view of customer that you really want to see to be productive. That's the value that AI in the back end can bring to you. Then I think you do need to decide which product you use for which category. And in my opinion, as you move forward in this new world with that new customer contract, you'll need tools in each of these disciplines. Reference data, so MDM in other words, quality, big data management, integration, platform as a service, that's integrating data from the cloud, as well as integrating data from on-prem and legacy systems, as well as having a catalog of data. I'll talk about a little bit about that in a second. And making sure data is secure to support that new customer contract. You'll need all of those. You'll need to move fast, so you'll need accelerators that help you get some of the way, pre-built models, tools, templates. And what you'll need to support is a much broader user base for the data. Data should not be in the hands of a technical expert who's a coder. It should be in the hands of someone who can understand that data and turn it into value. And usually, those people operate in the business or have business quasi-roles like data scientists or business analysts who can make the bridge between business and IT. So once we've got that kind of capability, we can consume the volume of data, the complexity, the different source types, the different storage locations. What do we do with it? Well, often, many organizations have rushed to build a lake, a data lake. That will be the solution to all our problems, having a data lake. I think there are many organizations who haven't derived any value from building a data lake. Because it's not just enough to put all your data in one place. I use the analogy, sometimes I think about this, and you think about a self-storage depot. You walk into a big building and it's got loads of stuff in it. But how do you find what's in that building? You don't know what's in it. You don't know where stuff is. So my advice would be, don't just think lake, think catalog. This is a picture of a famous library in Italy. Where do you think you're going to have a better chance of finding what you need? In a lake where potentially it's just a mass of data, or in something that's indexed, has a catalog associated to it, and a structure that's usable by the masses, okay? Having a lake does not mean that a business analyst or a marketing manager can all of a sudden access data and make a smart decision around a new product or service. It needs to be accessible. So let's catalog our data. Let's catalog our assets so we can produce it out and give it out to people. And that's where the next step comes in. Once we've got that catalog of data, you need to democratize that data. It's a phrase that I use, but what it means is just put it into the hands of everyone in your organization. Okay. That's where the power lies in terms of turning that data into value. And the way that I would say to do that, think of how we look for data now. We as the average human being will go on the net and we'll use Google or your favored web search and you'll type in a question and you'll get an answer. That's what we're used to. Why can't we do that for our own data in our organizations? Once you have that lake and catalog, what we need then is a search engine-like tool that we can use to democratize that data out. The other thing that I'd say is we need to think differently about how we invest in that innovation around data. All too often, my personal opinion is that, particularly in organizations where funding comes from IT, we think about a project and a project has to have a return. And we think that if we invest X, we will get Y. And then that project will be signed off. In my opinion, that's the wrong way to think about these innovations in data when you're thinking about how data become valuable to you. Rather than thinking about a project in a typical waterfall pattern, for example, think about it more like an R&D project. Those of you in the room who might be pharmaceutical companies, for example, you associate a budget to R&D, and you know you're probably going to have a 90% failure rate in that budget line. But the 10% that does achieve success, that 10% is hugely valuable, and the entire profits of the organization are based upon the 10% that succeeds. And we don't worry about the high failure rate, the 80% or the 90% that doesn't. In my world, we should be thinking about the data, the innovation around data in the same way. We should expect a high failure rate. What is important, though, is that we shouldn't be afraid to fail. But when we fail fast. And that's where you minimize the cost of that 80% failure rate. The worst thing is to fail most of the time, but most of the time it's extremely high cost. So how can we minimize the cost of failure? Which is about prototyping, which is about ad hoc analytics, being able to do things quickly, leveraging cloud architecture to scale quickly, and so on. So fail fast. I just worked on a paper, actually, for the retail sector, which was called Pop-Up Analytics. So we did a Bright Talk webinar, which will be disseminated into the Nordic territories. So if you're interested in that type of thing, which is along these lines, take a look at that. So don't be afraid to fail, just fail fast. So let me recap. How can we sign the new customer contract with our customer base and turn our data into value? I think we start with the desire, the demand, work within our own organizations to build the desire to move in that way. Now, we talked about reinforcing that culture as well, and we can leverage things like governance as a strong tool, if you like, to support that conversation within our organizations. Whichever way you do, you're going to need to invest in a data platform. You cannot, into the future, have thousands of different tools, thousands of different skill sets, open source here, Project X doing this, Project Y doing that. At the bare minimum, you need to decide for the different disciplines like quality, integration, MDM, governance, what tool you use, and stick to a standard within the business. Or adopt a platform which can do as much of it as possible. And that platform should encapsulate AI. For the same reasons you want AI for BI, you need AI in preparation and management of data. We need to catalog the assets associated to the data. Informatica, that's one of the things that our AI does. With 25 years of experience at data, we can look at data and we can catalog it. If you want to know more, we can talk to us at the stand. But you will need to catalog your assets. Without doing that, what you will get is a lake that's full of fish, but you don't know how to fish. And the catalog gives you the index to become searchable. Once you've then got searchable, you've got the tools that you can deploy on top of that to democratize that data that you share out to the people who are going to turn that into value, like your analysts, your line of business managers, your data scientists. Then lastly, think differently. Don't be afraid of failure. Think R&D rather than thinking a standard project. Don't be afraid to fail, just fail fast. Because like gold, your data is more valuable if it's embedded in use cases. I don't know if you know this, but gold is used extensively in electronics. Gold on the end of interconnects for hi-fis. Those are teeth, jewelry, etc. Gold in this form is actually more valuable than gold in its raw form. You'll pay more for a piece of jewelry than you'll actually pay for the gold content in it. The same is true of your data. If you take the steps, if you take that approach, you'll deliver more value from your data than ever before. So don't keep your data locked away in that vault. Take the steps to make sure you use the alchemy and increase the value of your gold. Thank you. Thanks very much.